Member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to speak and offer the New Democrats' perspective on Bill C-25, but before I do, I want to refresh the memory of the House and Canadians who may be watching. In June of 2009, this House unanimously passed an NDP Opposition Day motion which laid out how this House should address the pension crisis that was rising rapidly at that time in our country. You'll no doubt remember, Mr. Speaker, that the motion spoke of the need for a national pension insurance plan to protect workers' deferred wages, that their pensions plans would be protected if their companies were to collapse. We also started a conversation at that time, Mr. Speaker, regarding a phased-in increase with the goal of doubling the Canada Pension Plan. Now, Mr. Speaker, first in that Opposition Day motion, and I will state first in the platform of the NDP in the May election, was an increase to the Guaranteed Income Supplement, a significant increase to that supplement to raise seniors on GIS who are living below the poverty line up above that poverty line. Mr. Speaker, that was between 250,000 Canadians, most of them women. Now, our party ran an election platform that showed Canadians what our intentions were for Canada's retirement security program. Nowhere, Mr. Speaker, nowhere in the Conservatives' platform was there a plank that indicated to Canadians that once elected, the Conservatives would be changing the eligibility for old age security from 65 to 67. And last week at the Davos Convention, our Prime Minister told Canadians, along with a stunning PMO release, that many Canadians would have to work an extra 2 years before receiving their old age security. Mr. Speaker, seniors pay taxes all of their lives expecting to have OAS as part of their retirement income. Now the Prime Minister is going to move, or apparently going to move, the goalposts on them. What about these single unemployed women? Those are the women we talked about that live in poverty under the GIS. They will now have to stay on some sort of provincial assistance for an additional 2 years because they're already in poverty. They already need Canadians' help. And I wonder if the government has considered the statistic that people in the bottom 20% of the workforce pass away 5 to 6 years earlier than those in the top 20%. In fact, in Hamilton, we have that very condition between Ancaster and the Hamilton East, where the life expectancy differs because of people's poverty rate. Or do they consider that half of all low-income men will collect OAS GIS checks for only a short period of 10 years? Raising the retirement age would clearly have a negative impact on those persons aged 65 who are in poor health and unable to continue working. And what about the cost? The latest actuarial reports on the OAS GIS projects that the number of recipients will increase from 4.9 million today to 9.3 million by 2030. I think that the opposition and the government do agree on that statistic. But the increase to total costs that is projected is much more modest, from 2.4% of GDP to a peak of 3.2% of GDP by 2030. That, Mr. Speaker, is because the economy is expected to grow. But think about this for a moment. We have a government who, since taking power, has decreased the corporate taxes by $16 billion a year. $16 billion taken out of the fiscal capacity of this place to make determinations for things that Canadians need. And there's nothing that Canadians need more than old age security protection. So it should be no surprise to anybody that if you remove the monies coming in, that somewhere along the line you're going to face a problem with what you have to pay out. And we should never, ever put that burden directly on our seniors as suggested by the Prime Minister last week. Now, one may ask, what has all this to do with Bill C-25? That's a fair question. The NDP believes that seniors' retirement income security is about far more than one plan or another option. we believe that we need to have a broader conversation on pensions, that Canadians want us to look at pensions as a whole, not to cut them, but to ensure that they are there to protect our seniors in years to come. Specifically, and more directly on Bill C-25, I would suggest Bill C-25 itself appears to have been hastily put together. And I know that the Minister of State did travel the country, as I did, listening to seniors, in fairness to his work. But there also was a corresponding campaign across this country, coming from Labour, coming from seniors groups, political parties, most notably the NDP, talking about increasing the Canada Pension Plan, the need to build the foundation, because 12 million Canadians today do not have any savings, do not have any pensions, and we have to build that foundation to protect them in the future. Well, the proposals that are in Bill C-25 will not even guarantee an actual pension. I would suggest at best we should be referring to this as a pension scheme, not a pension plan. A saving schemes that would pool the funds of members' accounts to achieve lower costs in relation to investment management and plan administration. True, but Mr. Speaker, a cautionary must be put into this at this point, because for the fees to be applied by the plan managers have not been capped by this legislation. And the experience elsewhere in the world is that fees often erode your pension savings to the point that they don't even keep pace with inflation. Clearly, the bill is designed to appeal to the self-employed and workers at small and mid-sized firms, companies that often lack the means by which to administer a private sector plan. But another caution, this plan will be just another kind of defined contribution plan, Mr. Speaker. Employees will contribute a portion of their salary into the retirement scheme, where it will be invested in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Sounds familiar? Sounds like an RRSP to me. Some companies may choose to make matching contributions, those with a clear conscience and want to see that their employees are well taken care of, but they're not required to do so, and I would suggest in the climate in the business community today, they cut every corner they can. But I want to caution again that this is a defined contribution plan, and in no way guarantees how much money will be left when you retire. The market risks, as with an RRSP, are borne entirely and solely by the individual or the employee. PRPPs will be managed at a profit by regulated financial institutions like banks, insurance companies, trust companies. But as I already cautioned, Bill C-25 places no caps on administration fees or costs. It is flawed in that it merely assumes lower costs will emerge through competition in the market. Competition in the market. Did your telephone bill go up? Did your cable bill go up over the last 25 years since they deregulated the market? Of course it did. PRPPs allow for but do not require matching funds from employers, so I believe they simply won't contribute. Another caution for Canadians, unlike CPP, PRPPs will not be indexed to inflation. Provinces and territories will determine whether it will be mandatory for employers or employees of certain size companies to offer PRPPs. Pooled registered pension plans, as envisioned in Bill C-25, will fail to protect retirement security because they will encourage families to gamble even more of their retirement savings in a failing stock market. If that market goes up, yes, you go up. But if it goes down, you go down with it. Anybody who's watched their RRSPs plummet over the past year knows exactly how risky savings tied to the stock market can be. Telling families that investing in the same system that is already failing them shows how out of touch with Canadians the Conservatives truly are. The NDP has, for the past 3 years, championed a suite of retirement income security proposals. First, as we've indicated, that they should increase the Canada Pension Plan over a period of time that will double the benefits to $1,920 a month in 30 years. Growing the CPP is simply the best, lowest-cost pension reform option that is available to us today. The government must also amend federal bankruptcy legislation to move pensioners and long-term disability recipients to the front of the line of creditors when their employer enters court protection or declares bankruptcy. Hear, hear. We have seen company after company across this country take the savings of their workers and treat it as a secondary fund to pay off their bills. And as I said in my opening remarks, this bill seems to have been hastily thrown together in response to pressure from Labour and other groups. But according to the Conference Board of Canada, something that we must keep in mind, 1.6 million Canadians live in poverty. 12 million Canadians lack a pension plan. By OECD standards, Canada's CPP-QPP system is relatively miserly. Other countries similar to Canada provide far more generous public guaranteed pensions. Social Security in the United States has benefits of about $30,000 a year. The maximum benefit in Canada is less than $12,000 per year. Even if you add old age security to that, which is at a minimum of $7,000 a year, the total is still far below U.S. Social Security. Most workers have no RRSP because they can't afford it. In fact, 31% of eligible Canadians, only 31%, actually use their ability to invest in RRSPs. Meanwhile, the latest numbers for the return on CPP investments show that the market barely lost ground with less than 1%, while the stock market, I shouldn't say the market, Mr. Speaker, CPP, barely lost ground, while the stock market fell by 11%. There goes your pooled retirement pension plan, down 11%. It's interesting to note, and the Minister of State referred to where they studied, and one of the places they studied was Australia. Australia has had a similar plan to PRPPs. But there, the plan was mandatory with an opt-out provision. The Australian Super Fund requires employers to enroll their workers in one of the many defined contribution plans offered by the private sector. A recent review, after 12 years of experience, the Australian Super Fund, commissioned by the Australian government, the report that is, didn't even match inflation, and again, because the fees that were being charged were eroding it. For 6 years, the Conservatives have done next to nothing by way of securing retirement for Canadians. Bill C-25 is yet another hastily thrown together half measure in lieu of real action. Canadians want and deserve better. This government, once again, with these fees, almost like bonuses to the executives, have put the interests of Bay Street ahead of the interests of hard-working Canadian citizens. I can say to you, Mr. Speaker, that we hear on the other side of this House often comments about our ability or the chance to govern. If the NDP were to govern, we will ensure that our pension plans are there to give retirement security to seniors as they deserve. Canadians, Mr. Speaker, do not want their retirement savings subject to the market. If they did, Mr. Speaker, they would invest in our RRSPs. It's very clear they need protection. So, for some of the reasons that I've just spoken of, New Democrats will not support this saving scheme because the Conservatives are offering up, instead of taking real action on both protecting existing pensions, enhancing retirement security for those who lack a workplace pension plan at all. PRPPs are not pensions. While the government claims that PRPP will provide Canadians with lower fees to potential economies of scale that do not exist with RRSPs, there's no data that proves that. In fact, less than one-third of the people entitled to contribute to RRSPs don't do so. You know, over 24% of those surveys use the TFSAs for retirement savings. And yes, that's one tool in the toolbox, but it's time for this government to take real action to provide retirement security for those 12 million Canadians I referred to earlier, the 12 million that have no savings, have no pension, and God bless them, have a very, very bleak future. Canadians do not need yet one more private plan, a voluntary savings scheme. Voluntary savings has not worked for a lot of reasons. And this scheme, if enacted, will do little or nothing to improve Canadians' ability to foresee their future and live in dignity. Expanding CPP, on the other hand, would not cost the government any more than the proposed PRPP. Expanding CPP would not entail transferring huge management fees to private institutions, because we have the CPP Investment Board already managing the funds. The PRPP, as outlined in this bill, fails to extend coverage to those who are unable to afford a pension in the first place. And I repeated that several times in my speech because I think that that's the essence of the problem that's facing much of Canada today, many Canadians, is that they have very little hope for their future in retirement. Mr. Speaker, how much time would I have left? Okay. So I want to read some commentaries then, Mr. Speaker, if I may, from the Calgary Herald, November 27th, 2010. And they write, the CPP already covers almost all Canadian workers, thus spreads the risk of management fees. It's fully portable, offers guaranteed income to all retirees, and is the only risk-free investment broadly available to workers. Private RRSPs and employer pension plans have proven much riskier than initially billed. Those who are in company pension plans are likely in a defined contribution scheme where the amount that goes in is predetermined, but the payout is based on how well the fund is invested and ultimately how well it performs. Nortel workers know only too well how that one worked. And Professor John Kesselman, Canada Research Chair in Public Finance at Simon Fraser University School of Public Policy. And he says, expanding the CPP is the best option for ensuring Canadian workers' retirement income security. It can ensure results that none of the many alternative reform proposals for private schemes can provide. CARP, who has made many presentations to our Finance Committee over the years, and the Director of Political Advocacy at CARP, Susan Ing, writes, CARP remains committed to improving retirement benefits for the current crop of seniors, including increasing CPP, OAS, and GIS payments, getting a moratorium on RRIF withdrawals, making access to tax-free savings accounts retroactive, and lobbying to remove the HST from seniors' bills. At this point, I'm going to stop with the other commentary and just add, Mr. Speaker, that this government has been on notice, clearly on notice, repeatedly in this House since 2009 of a crisis situation for the pension security of future for Canadians going forward. It's not like out of the blue that this was a surprise. And we heard commentary earlier today from the member from Burlington talking about the fact that you needed the agreement of the provinces in order to move forward in Canada Pension Plan. And it's a kind of a smoke and mirrors in a way, because you do need a majority of the provinces. And going into Kananaskis, there were 6 finance ministers from across the country writing to our finance minister in support of expanding the CPP. There are issues for these provinces, but in the last round of talks between the finance ministers and our finance minister, there was very little done or said on the Canada Pension Plan. There's room for action on the Canada Pension Plan, and very clearly the NDP believes that's the vehicle of choice. That's the most secure vehicle for moving forward, and I thank you very much for your time. Hear, hear.